The first time I saw him, he was sitting at table 7 alone, quiet, not pretending to be anyone, but someone who wanted to disappear. That's what caught my attention. Not the way he was dressed, though it was clear his gray suit had cost more than my entire rent. Not even his face, though it looked familiar in a way I couldn't quite place. It was the stillness. Like the world was loud, and he was the only one who'd stepped out of it. At the Maple Grove Inn, people like him showed up more often than you'd think. Celebrities who wanted to get lost in the mountains, authors who hated attention, tech founders on some kind of spiritual detox. It's that kind of place, quiet old wood floors, a view of the Blue Ridge, that makes people think life might still have some meaning. We serve $38 trout and lavender lemonade and pretend not to care who our guests are. That's part of the magic. My name's Maya Brooks. I'm 24, and I've worked here for the past 2 years. I wait tables, I smile, I keep secrets. People talk more than they should when the wine is expensive and the room is quiet. I've overheard marriage proposals, divorce, ultimatums, investment deals, reconciliations, breakups. You learn how to vanish while still being right there. But that night, I didn't vanish. Nancy, the manager, pulled me aside during pre-shift. "You're on 7. Guest requested privacy and our best server." "Got it," I said, tying my apron. She looked at me. "He booked under the name Mr. Smith. But I don't think that's who he is." That made me pause. "How come?" "Because the guy who checked in drives a custom black Audi, tipped the valet $100, and told housekeeping he didn't want turn-down service or visitors. He's someone." I nodded. That was code for treat him like royalty, but don't act like you know who he is. When I walked over to table 7, I noticed 2 things immediately. First, he was facing the window, not the room. People like him usually wanted to be seen. Not this one. Second, his hands were clasped on the white tablecloth, still except for his thumb moving slowly in circles against his wrist. That was when I saw it. A small tattoo just under the edge of his sleeve. A red magnolia bloom, delicate but bold with vines that curled into an infinity shape. My chest tightened. My fingers nearly forgot how to pour water. Because my mother has that tattoo, exactly that tattoo. Same flower, same placement, same design. Only difference was hers had faded. And hers came with silence. She never told me what it meant, just once said, "That was from another life." I was 13. I didn't ask again. I blinked, forcing myself back into the moment. "Good evening, sir. My name's Maya. I'll be taking care of you tonight. Can I start you with something to drink?" He looked up at me then, and that was the third thing I noticed, his eyes. Storm gray. Tired. Not the kind of tired from work. The kind that settles behind your ribs and stays there. "I'll have whatever red you recommend," he said. His voice was soft but certain. East Coast accent, maybe Boston, maybe older, New York money polished down. "The Merlot from the local vineyard is lovely," I replied. He nodded once. "That's fine." I poured his water, placed the wine glass gently, then stepped away to the bar. Behind me, I could feel the heat of curiosity rising up the back of my neck. That tattoo. I hadn't seen it in years, not since Mom got too sick to wear short sleeves. And even then, she never wanted it visible in photos, never wanted it talked about. What are the odds, I thought? What are the odds that this man, this stranger with a billionaire's stillness and sadness in his voice, would have the exact same tattoo as my mother? By the time I brought his wine and returned with the menu, my heart was thudding with a rhythm I couldn't slow down. "Are you ready to order?" I asked, keeping my voice even. He glanced at the menu, then closed it without reading. "Something simple. Steak medium, vegetables. No sauce." "Yes, sir." I started to step back again, but something stopped me. I don't do this, ever. But I did it now, I'm sorry, I said, keeping my tone soft, respectful. But I couldn't help noticing your tattoo. His hand paused mid-air just slightly. That flower, I continued. My mother has a tattoo just like it. He didn't say anything at first. His eyes met mine, and it was like time stepped out of the room. What did you say? He asked. Your tattoo. A red magnolia with vines in an infinity shape. My mother has the same one. Same design, same place on her wrist. His wine glass wobbled slightly. He caught it, set it down, then leaned back in his chair, visibly rattled. What's your mother's name? He asked quietly. I hesitated. Then answered Rosalind. Rosalind Brooks. For a long moment he didn't move. Then he whispered almost to himself, it can't be. What, his face changed? The tiredness wasn't tired anymore. It was something else. Recognition, regret, disbelief. I have to go, he said abruptly. He stood, pulled a wallet from his coat, dropped several crisp bills on the table, and stepped away before I could respond. Wait, I said instinctively. He turned to me, his voice hushed raw. Tell her I never stopped looking. And just like that, he was gone. The wine glass sat half full. The candle flickered. The seat was still warm when I picked up the cash, 5 $100 bills. No name, no card, just a ghost who knew my mother, and a tattoo that suddenly meant more than I'd ever imagined. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. By the time I clocked out that night, the dining room was nearly empty, but my thoughts were louder than ever. I walked out into the cold Asheville air with Daniel Whitaker's face burned into my memory, the look on it when I said my mother's name. That glassy shock, like hearing a ghost. He knew her, not in the passing way people say they knew someone. No, this was deeper. His voice, the way his hand trembled when I said, Rosalind. He had loved her. Or still did. I drove home in silence, letting the headlights cut through the dark mountain roads, letting the questions swirl. Why didn't she ever tell me about him? The moment I stepped through the door of our tiny rented bungalow, I smelled chamomile tea and menthol. The scent of illness trying to pass for comfort. Mama, I called, setting my bag down. In the kitchen, sweetheart, her voice was faint but steady. She was sitting at the small table, bundled in her favorite gray cardigan, pale fingers, wrapped around a steaming mug. The light above her buzzed softly, casting long shadows on her face. Even now she was beautiful in that quiet, understated way. Soft eyes, thoughtful smile. But she was thinner than last week, her cheeks more hollow. You're home late, she said gently. It was a long shift. Someone booked the VIP table, big tipper. She nodded but didn't press. She never did. I watched her take a slow sip, and I wanted to ask her right then. About the tattoo, about Daniel, about everything. But the words sat like stones in my throat. Instead I said, Do you need anything before bed? She shook her head. Just sit with me for a bit. So I did. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat across from her, and listened to the ticking of the wall clock. We used to talk easily, but since the diagnosis, most of our conversations lived in the space between words. She was always trying to protect me from how bad it really was. And I was pretending not to notice how much strength it took her just to sit upright. My eyes dropped to her wrist. The edge of the tattoo peeked out beneath her sleeve, the same one I'd seen earlier tonight on a man she once loved. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Not yet. The next morning I woke before the sun. I couldn't sleep. My chest felt full of questions that didn't have neat endings. I made coffee, watched the light stretch over the hills, and pulled out the shoebox I kept under my bed. Inside were small pieces of my mother's life. Photos, postcards, a pressed magnolia bloom between wax paper. There was even a Polaroid of her in her 20s, bare shoulders, laughing tattoo clearly visible. She was sitting on the hood of a red pickup truck holding a camera in her lap. No date, no writing on the back, but I'd stared at this photo so many times over the years, always wondering who took it. Who was she laughing with? I pulled out my phone, opened a browser, and typed it in again. Daniel Whitaker. The internet was careful with him. Not many interviews, no Instagram, a few old business profiles from when his software company sold for billions. Then, he vanished. Rumors said he was living in Italy, or had started a monastery in Vermont. One even said he was writing a memoir in Montana. But none of them knew the truth. He'd been here. Last night, at table 7, with the same tattoo as my mother. My chest squeezed with something I couldn't name. I had to know. I had to ask her. So that afternoon I waited until she'd finished her meds and was resting on the couch wrapped in her fleece blanket. I sat at the edge of the cushion and carefully took her hand in mine. "Mama," I said softly. She looked over, eyes half closed. "Mom, can I ask you something personal?" She gave a sleepy smile. "That depends. Are you in trouble?" "No, I took a breath. Your tattoo. The magnolia with the vines. What does it mean?" For a moment, she didn't react. Her smile faded slowly. Her fingers tightened slightly around mine. "Maya," she said carefully. "Why are you asking about that now?" I hesitated, then told the truth. "Because last night a man came into the restaurant. He had the exact same tattoo. Same wrist, same design. And when I said your name, he looked like he'd seen a ghost. Her whole body stilled, not in fear, in recognition." "What was his name?" she whispered. "Daniel? Daniel Whitaker." She closed her eyes and a tear slid silently down her cheek. Oh, she breathed. He found me. I leaned closer. "Mama, who is he?" She looked so small in that moment. Fragile, yes, but also like a woman standing at the edge of a memory she hadn't touched in decades. "I met him when I was 23. She began, her voice shaking. "He was working out of a tiny rented cabin up near the river bend. No money back then. Just big dreams and this wild idea that he could build something that would change the world." "You were together?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "For one summer. The most beautiful, reckless summer of my life. Why didn't you ever tell me I was going to?" she said. "But everything happened so fast. My aunt in Atlanta had a stroke and I had to leave suddenly. I thought I'd be back in a few weeks, maybe a month. But then, her voice broke. I found out I was pregnant. I came back to Asheville to find him, but he was gone. Moved. No forwarding address. No goodbye. I looked for weeks, and eventually, I gave up. I stared at her, my throat tight. "You were going to tell him about me, I tried?" she whispered. But I didn't know where to send the letter. And the tattoo. She touched her wrist gently. "We got them the night before I left. We wanted something to remind us that what we had was real, that even if we were apart, it wouldn't be lost." My heart ached. He said, "To tell you, he never stopped looking." At that, she covered her mouth and wept. "I thought he forgot me?" She sobbed. "All these years I thought he just moved on. He didn't." I held her hand as she cried, and in that moment everything shifted. The unanswered questions, the silences, the empty spaces in the stories she used to tell. I saw her differently now, not just as my mother, but as a woman who once loved someone deeply and lost him. And now he was back. Not in the past, not in memory, but here, in Asheville, at table 7. The next morning started with clouds pressing low over the Blue Ridge, the sky that pale, bruised gray that makes you want to stay under covers a little longer. But I couldn't rest. Not after what my mother told me the night before. She hadn't said much after the tears faded, just held my hand, and asked quietly, "Do you think he'll come back?" I didn't know how to answer. Now, standing at the hostess podium at the inn, I kept glancing toward the glass doors, half expecting to see Daniel walk through them again. Same quiet steps, same tired eyes. But table 7 remained empty. "You good?" Nancy asked, handing me the table assignments for lunch. I blinked. "Yeah, just tired." She looked at me for a beat longer than usual. Nancy was the kind of boss who didn't pry, but she noticed everything. "Well," she said, "if you're tired, that's your own fault. You pulled a double yesterday, and I heard your tip jar looked real generous when you left." I smiled weakly. One of those weird nights. She gave a non-committal and turned toward the kitchen. But I caught her watching me later. I think she sensed the shift in me, like something was out of place, but hadn't made a sound yet. By mid-afternoon, the dining room had thinned out. I stood near the bar, polishing glasses, when Eli walked in. Seeing him felt like exhaling after holding your breath too long. He wasn't dressed for work, just jeans and a faded flannel hands tucked in his pockets. His dark hair was messy from the wind, and his smile was soft when he saw me. "You hiding back here?" he asked. "Not hiding, just recovering." I hesitated, then set the glass down. "You know how sometimes life waits until you're least prepared before it drops something in your lap?" Eli tilted his head. "Is this about your mom?" I nodded, motioned for him to follow me to the side garden, where guests rarely went this time of year. The wind had picked up, scattering leaves across the cobblestones. We sat on the cold bench, and I told him everything. From the tattoo, to the dinner shift, to Daniel Whitaker. Eli didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he rubbed his jaw, thinking. "So let me get this straight. A billionaire shows up out of nowhere, and he has the same tattoo as your mom. Then he finds out her name, panics, and disappears. Pretty much. And your mom confirms they were in love. And that he might be my father." The words came out quietly. Eli exhaled slow. "Okay. That's... wow." I laughed once, sharp and humorless. "Yeah. That's about where I'm at." He turned to me. "Do you want him to be..." That question caught me off guard. I hadn't let myself think that far yet. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I grew up thinking he was just... someone who left. I made peace with that a long time ago. But now I looked out at the trees, the way the leaves shook in the breeze. Now it feels like everything I believed might have been wrong, and he's not just some guy. He's Daniel Whitaker." Eli's voice was careful. "That doesn't make him a better person." "No," I agreed. "But it makes the questions louder." A long silence settled between us. Then Eli asked, "What are you going to do?" Before I could answer, my phone buzzed in my pocket. "Unknown number." I showed him the screen. "Answer it," he said. I stood and stepped away, heart pounding. "Hello, Ms. Brooks." A calm male voice, polished, precise. "Yes, my name is Thomas Beck. I'm an associate of Mr. Daniel Whitaker. He asked me to reach out." My breath caught. "Why he would like to meet with you. At your convenience." I hesitated. "Did he say why?" There was a pause. "He believes there are things that need to be spoken. Things that cannot be explained over the phone. We're here at the inn. This afternoon. Discreetly." I swallowed hard. Okay. The call ended. I stood there for a moment, phone in hand, trying to ground myself. Eli had walked over. "What was that?" He sent someone, I said. "He wants to talk." "Alone, I don't know. You want me to stay?" I looked at him. He always asked that when Mom had a rough day, or when I was too tired to get the car fixed. "You want me to stay?" It wasn't a demand. It was a question that meant more than it sounded. But this wasn't his to carry. "Thank you," I said. "But I need to do this myself." Eli nodded, hands still in his pockets. If anything feels off, just text me. I'll be 2 minutes away. Always the protector. He smiled faintly. It's kind of my thing. By 4 o'clock, the inn was quieter. The fire in the lobby was crackling low, casting shadows across the wooden beams. I was back in uniform, standing at the same table where everything had started. Thomas Beck arrived first, late 50s. Silver hair, a quiet confidence. He walked in, spotted me instantly, and extended a hand. Ms. Brooks, thank you for agreeing to meet. I shook it. Of course, is he coming? He's already here. We thought it would be better to keep things low-key. He motioned toward the private sunroom near the back of the dining hall. Daniel was standing there. Same gray suit, same worn expression. He looked at me like he wasn't sure if he should come closer or apologize from where he stood. Hi, I said. Hi, he replied. The room was quiet except for the sound of the wind outside and the distant hum of the kitchen. Daniel waited until Thomas closed the door before he spoke again. I'm sorry I left the way I did the other night. I wasn't ready. I wasn't expecting you to be, I said softly. He looked relieved by that, but only slightly. I haven't seen her in 25 years, he said, his voice tightening. But the second you said her name, I knew. I nodded, arms crossed gently in front of me. She thought you forgot her. His jaw flexed. I never did. I just didn't know where she went. And I didn't know about you. I looked down at my hands. She didn't know how to reach you. Daniel stepped forward slowly, carefully, like every movement carried weight. I don't want to intrude. I don't want to disrupt whatever life you and Rosalind have built. But if there's even the smallest chance that... He paused. The emotion in his voice cracked just slightly. I need to see her. I need to look her in the eye and ask the question that's haunted me for 2 decades. I met his eyes. There was no arrogance, no billionaire shine, just a man who looked like he hadn't let himself hope in a very long time. I'll ask her, I said. But she's sick. It's not easy for her. I understand. The silence stretched thick and fragile. Is it true? I asked quietly. Were you in love with her? He blinked like the question knocked the breath out of him. I never stopped, he whispered. I pressed a hand to my chest, grounding myself. I'll let her know. And with that, I left him standing in the sunroom, framed by fading light with a love story, trying to find its way back after all this time. If you enjoyed this video, comment 1 to let me know. If not, comment 2. Your thought mattered to me either way. I didn't go straight home after leaving Daniel. I sat in my car in the employee parking lot, staring out at the low mountains in the distance, cloaked in fog, like they were trying to keep their own secrets. My fingers were still curled around the handle of the driver's side door, but I couldn't make myself move. He hadn't tried to make excuses. He hadn't tried to win me over. He just asked for the chance to see her. And the way he said I never stopped, I believed him. By the time I walked into our house, twilight had settled like a hush across the walls. The living room lamp cast a soft golden pool over the blanket, where my mother sat curled up on the couch. Her tea had gone cold on the table beside her, forgotten. She looked up when she saw me, the worry already in her eyes. You're late. Everything okay? I nodded and slipped off my coat, my voice catching in my throat. He wants to see you. She didn't ask who. She didn't have to. She looked down at her hands, trembling just slightly in her lap. Whenever you're ready. Silence fell between us, long and heavy. I always imagined how it would feel, she whispered, eyes still lowered. But now that he's really here, I'm scared. I moved to sit beside her, close enough for her shoulder to rest against mine. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for. He said that. She was quiet for a long moment before finally nodding. I want to see him. So we made arrangements for the following afternoon. Daniel would come to the house quietly, respectfully, no assumptions. Just one man and one woman trying to walk back into a conversation they lost 25 years ago. That night I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, questions racing. Would he still see her the same way? Would she forgive him? What would I feel watching the two people who made me meeting again as strangers? The next day passed in fragments. I cleaned the house without thinking. Folded and refolded the same towel 3 times. Mom insisted on wearing something soft and simple, her pale blue sweater, the one she always wore when she needed courage. I helped brush her hair, still growing back in soft silver tufts after treatment. "You look beautiful," I said. She smiled faintly. "I want to look like myself." The version he remembers, even if it's buried under years. At 3:47 p.m., there was a knock at the door. Every second after that seemed to stretch. I opened it. Daniel stood on the porch, not in a suit this time, but a navy sweater and black coat. His eyes lined with exhaustion, and something I didn't recognize at first, vulnerability. "Come in," I said quietly. He stepped inside slowly, carefully, as if the house might collapse beneath him. When she saw him, my mother didn't say anything at first. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She simply stood up, straightened her spine, and whispered, "Hello, Daniel." His voice cracked. "Rosalind." For a moment they didn't move, just stood there watching each other. Two people carrying the weight of decades in the space of a single glance. Then he took a step forward. "I never stopped looking," he said, voice raw. "I swear to you I didn't stop." She shook her head, eyes already filling. "I thought you were gone. I came back, and you were just gone. I had to leave. My dad got sick. I took a job in Charlotte to pay the bills. I left my number with the landlord, but..." She closed her eyes. "I asked him. He said you'd moved. No forwarding address, no explanation. I thought you stayed in Atlanta, that you'd decided not to come back." A silence opened between them again, full of years that neither of them knew how to reclaim. "I wanted to come back," she whispered. "I tried. And then I found out I was pregnant." Daniel inhaled sharply, eyes darting to me. "I came back 7 months along," she said, her voice shaking now. "I knocked on doors. I asked anyone who'd known you. Nothing." He stepped closer, pain etched across every line of his face. "I would have been there. Rosalind, I would have done everything I could." "I know that now," she whispered, eyes glistening. I watched, barely breathing, as he reached out hesitantly like he needed permission and gently touched her hand. She let him. And just like that, they sat down beside each other on the couch. She was frail, her body tired from the battle with illness. He was worn down in a different way, like regret had hollowed him out over the years. But in that moment, they looked whole. "I thought about you every day," he said quietly. "When the company took off, when I bought my first house, every time I saw a magnolia bloom. I thought, if I ever find her again, I'll ask why she never came back. But I never imagined it was like this." She reached for his hand, now more confident. "And I thought you moved on. I made up stories to survive, that you'd met someone else, that you were happy. It was easier than believing you'd forgotten." They both looked at me then. Neither of them said it out loud, but we all felt it. I was the space between their stories. The unanswered letter. The bridge that somehow hadn't broken even after all that time. Daniel cleared his throat, his voice thick. "May I ask, did she ever know about me?" My mother glanced at me gently. I told her what I could. That her father wasn't from Italy like I'd first said. that he was someone I loved deeply, but we lost each other. I folded my arms, watching them both carefully. "You're not just some idea anymore," I said softly. "You're here." "So, what now?" Daniel's eyes locked with mine. "Now I do whatever I can, to make up for what was lost. If you'll let me." My mother leaned back, breathing deeply, tears drying slowly against her cheek. "I never thought I'd see you again," she whispered. He smiled, then a soft, sad smile. "Then let's not waste what we've been given." And for the first time since the world turned upside down, I let myself hope. Hope that love, no matter how late it returns, still has a place to land. Daniel stayed for almost 2 hours that afternoon. They sat on the couch together like time hadn't stolen everything between them, only paused it. They talked in low voices. I couldn't always hear about the little cabin by the river, where they used to spend weekends, about her aunt's stroke, and the flight she had to catch, about everything they missed and everything they still remembered. I made tea, then poured it out untouched. The air in the house felt different while he was there, heavy like the walls knew this reunion was sacred and didn't want to interrupt. I stayed in the kitchen, mostly pretending to be busy, while I listened to the rhythm of 2 people trying to find their way back to something they thought was gone. At one point, I heard my mother laugh. Not the tired chuckle she gave the nurses when they said something nice, but real laughter, light and sudden, like it surprised even her. I felt my throat tighten. It wasn't until nearly dusk that Daniel stood to leave. He stepped into the kitchen holding his coat in one hand and looked at me like he wasn't sure what he was allowed to say. "She's resting now," he said. Didn't want to admit she was tired, but I could see it. "She'll never admit it," I said softly. "It's her superpower." He smiled. "It always was." A beat passed, then another. "She told me you've been the one taking care of her," he added. "Everything. The bills, the appointments," even after he stopped himself, then nodded. "That's not small, Maya. That's everything." I didn't know what to say. Compliments from strangers, even ones who might be your biological father, still landed like foreign currency, valuable but unfamiliar. "She raised me on her own," I said. "I owe her everything." "You don't owe her," he said quietly. "You love her. There's a difference." He looked like he wanted to say more, but instead he pulled a business card from his coat pocket and set it on the counter. "That's my number. Personal cell. If she needs anything." "If you do." I nodded, fingers brushing the edge of the card. "Thank you." He hesitated, his hand still on the countertop. "Would it be okay if I visited again?" I looked at him closely, searching his expression. There was no entitlement there, just hope edged with caution. "She'd like that," I said. "Just go slow." "It's a lot." "I know," he said. "Believe me, I know." After he left, the house felt too quiet again, like it was holding its breath. I walked back to the living room. My mom was lying on the couch, eyes closed, a faint smile still tugging at the corner of her lips. "You're awake," I said softly. "I didn't want him to see me fall asleep," she murmured. "How vain is that?" "Not vain. Human." She opened her eyes and turned her head toward me. It felt like no time had passed. I sat down on the armrest beside her. "You looked like you never stopped knowing him." "I didn't," she whispered. Even when I tried to forget. I wanted to ask the questions that had been circling in my chest since he walked into our lives. But one kept rising to the surface. "Why didn't you tell me about him?" I asked. Her face changed. Not with guilt, but something gentler, like a woman unpacking a memory she'd folded up a long time ago. "I didn't know how to," she said. "I was 24 pregnant, alone. And when I came back to find him gone, it broke something in me. I convinced myself it was better not to wonder, better to protect you from what-ifs and maybes. I told myself if he cared enough, he'd find us. And when he didn't... She trailed off, staring at nothing. I buried that chapter. But he did care. She nodded, tears building again. I know that now. I sat quietly beside her, our hands touching lightly. The room felt warmer somehow. I'm not mad, I said. I wouldn't blame you if you were. I'm not, I repeated. But I need to understand what comes next. She looked at me, her eyes tired but clear. I don't know. I want to see him again. I want to talk about everything we missed. But I'm also scared. I don't know what he wants from us. I don't know what this means for you. I swallowed hard. Do you think he's my father? She exhaled. Yes, I do. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was heavy, yes, but honest. Will you let him be? She asked. If it turns out he is. I stared at the wall for a moment, letting the question settle. I don't know him, I said finally. But I know he looked at you like you were the only thing he'd ever searched for. And I know he didn't ask me for anything. He just asked for time. She nodded, her fingers closing around mine. That's all I want, too. A little more time? The next morning, I called the hospital to confirm her next round of appointments. While I waited on hold, I caught myself staring at Daniel's card still resting on the counter. I hadn't put it away yet. I didn't want to. When I hung up, I called him. He answered on the second ring. Maya. She wants to see you again, I said. His breath caught. When tomorrow? Around 1. But keep it simple. She doesn't want a show. I understand. Thank you. I could hear something shift in his voice, not just gratitude relief, like a man who'd been holding his breath for decades and was finally allowed to exhale. Daniel, I added, before hanging up. Yes, I think it's time you both stopped asking if it's too late. There was a pause. And then he said very quietly, So do I. I hung up and stood there for a moment, the phone still warm in my hand. Then I looked toward the couch where my mother had fallen asleep in the light, one hand resting gently over the place where the tattoo lay hidden beneath her sleeve. She never covered it up, never changed it, even when everything else faded. Now I understood why. The rain started just before noon, the soft kind that makes the world go quiet. No thunder, no urgency, just a slow, steady rhythm on the roof. My mother was sitting in her favorite chair near the window, wearing the blue sweater again. Her hands were folded in her lap, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers twitched slightly, like they were trying not to show how nervous she was. She hadn't said much all morning. Neither had I. I was making tea in the kitchen when I heard her voice drift in. Do you think he'll look at me and see the girl he once loved? She asked. I paused, the kettle in my hand. I turned toward her slowly. I think he's already seen you, and I think he came back anyway. Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. Just nodded once and turned her gaze back to the window. At exactly 1 o'clock, the knock came. I opened the door to find Daniel standing there, umbrella folded under his arm, rain still fresh on his shoulders. His expression was different today, still reserved, still careful, but softer. Like the air between them yesterday had given him permission to feel something again. Come in, I said. He stepped inside, wiping his shoes on the mat without needing to be asked. It was a small thing, but I noticed it. She's in the living room, I said, closing the door behind him. Daniel hesitated just a second before walking through the archway. My mother stood up when she saw him. Not because she had to. She wasn't strong enough for that today, but because some things are too important to meet sitting down. He stopped in front of her eyes, taking her in with that quiet reverence again. Then gently he reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out. A photograph. He held it out. I found this in a box I haven't opened in years, he said. She took it, and I leaned over slightly to see. It was her. Younger, radiant, sitting on the hood of an old red pickup, laughing into the wind. I'd seen the photo before in the shoebox under my bed. "You kept this?" she whispered. "It's the only one I had," he said softly. "I didn't have a camera back then. But I took this with a disposable roll I bought at a gas station because I wanted to remember how that day felt." Her hands trembled slightly as she stared at it. Then she pressed the picture to her chest. "I kept mine too," she said. His voice cracked. "I looked everywhere, Rosalind. I mean that, for years, I know now." He looked like he wanted to say more, but his eyes dropped for a moment, and he inhaled slowly. "There's something I need to ask. Both of you." I stepped into the room. "I'd like to do a paternity test," he said, his tone careful. "I want to know for sure if Maya is my daughter. I believe she is. I feel it in my bones. But I need it confirmed. For her. For me." I didn't move. I'd known this was coming. I'd expected it. But hearing it aloud still pulled something deep inside me. I looked at my mother. She looked back at me. And then I nodded. Okay. Daniel exhaled like he'd been holding that breath since the moment we met. "Thank you." "I want to know too," I said. "I've lived my whole life thinking I came from a question mark. I'd rather live with the truth even if it's hard." Daniel's eyes met mine. "You deserve that." My mother sat down again, her legs clearly tiring. "I always wanted to tell you. I didn't know how to open the door without tearing something apart." I knelt beside her. "It's not torn, Mama. It's just being rearranged." That afternoon, I drove to the clinic with Daniel in silence. The kind of silence that feels thick, not empty. There were no words for this part. Not yet. The nurse was kind. Professional. She explained the process, took the samples, and told us the results would be ready in 3 days. When we walked out, the rain had stopped. The pavement was still wet, glistening in the gray light, and the wind had picked up just enough to tug my coat around my knees. Daniel walked beside me to my car. "Can I ask you something?" I said before opening the door. "Of course." "Why did you never start a family?" I asked. You could have had anyone." He paused, then leaned lightly against the side of my car. "I tried," once he admitted. "Years after I stopped looking. I thought I should move on. I went on dates. I even got close with someone once. But every time I started to picture a future, it was her face I saw." He looked away toward the horizon. "And then I stopped trying. I built things instead. Companies. Foundations. I filled the time." "Did it work?" He shook his head. "Not really. Success doesn't keep you warm at night. It doesn't look you in the eyes and remind you who you used to be." I watched him heart tight. "I don't know what happens after this," I said. "We don't know the results yet. But I need you to understand something. I'm listening. My mother is the strongest person I know. And she didn't just raise me. She gave me everything. So whatever you want to be in our lives, it has to come from love. Not guilt." He nodded, jaw tightening slightly. "It does. That's the only place it's coming from." I opened the car door, then paused. "You said something the other day," I added. "That if you ever found her again, you'd ask the question that haunted you." His eyes locked with mine. "Did you a long beat past?" "Yes," he said. And the answer was that I still love her. The truth hung in the air between us, quiet and undeniable. Then he stepped back. "I'll see you soon, Maya." I watched him walk to his car, and as he drove away, I stood under the gray sky and finally let myself feel everything at once: fear, hope, grief, wonder. 3 days. That was all the time between the past and whatever came next. The morning of the third day came with sun. Finally, like the sky had been holding something in for just as long as we had. It was the kind of soft golden light that filtered through the curtains and made everything look warmer than it felt. I stood in the kitchen, holding my phone in one hand, staring at the counter like it would speak before the call came through. Every sound made me flinch the kettle, whistling the creak of the hallway floor, the buzz of a text that wasn't the one I was waiting for. My mother sat at the table wrapped in her robe, stirring honey into her tea. She was pretending to read, but I could see her eyes drifting off the page every few seconds. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked gently. "Some I lied." She gave me a look. She knew better. Waiting doesn't get easier just because you do it quietly. I sat across from her, folding my hands to stop them from shaking. "What do you think it'll say?" She didn't answer for a while. "Then I think it'll say what we already know." And maybe we did. Maybe we'd always known. But knowing something in your bones and seeing it printed in black and white, those are two very different things. At 10:03 a.m., my phone rang. I stared at the screen for a second before picking it up. "Hello, Ms. Brooks. This is Clara from Mountain Path Diagnostics. We have your results." My heart thudded against my ribs. "Okay," I breathed. "There's a written report available, but Mr. Whitaker asked if we could call you directly first, since you're listed as the secondary contact." I stood slowly walking to the window. "Yes, I'd like that." There was a pause, a breath, and then there is a 99.9% probability of paternity. The room went completely silent. "Maya," my mom asked, watching me closely. "Okay," I whispered into the phone. "Thank you." After I hung up, I turned around. She didn't need me to say it, she already knew. But I said it anyway. "He's my father." My mother covered her mouth eyes, brimming with tears. For a long time, we just looked at each other, two women who had carried different halves of the same story for years now, finally holding the same page. I always hoped she said softly, even when I convinced myself not to. I nodded, trying to breathe through the lump in my throat. Me too. That afternoon, I met Daniel outside the clinic. He was already waiting, hands in his coat pockets, eyes on the horizon like he needed the mountain line to keep him steady. When he saw me, he stood a little straighter. I didn't say anything at first. Just walked over, stood next to him. "The results are in," I said. He turned slowly to face me. They confirmed it. He closed his eyes. I wasn't ready for the emotion that moved across his face. It wasn't shock. It wasn't even joy. It was grief. Grief for the years lost, for the birthdays missed, for the school plays, the scraped knees, the bedtime stories that were never told. When he opened his eyes, they were glassy. "You're my daughter." I nodded. He reached for something in his coat, pulled out a small velvet box. I froze, not understanding, not ready for more. But when he opened it, it wasn't jewelry. It was a photo of a tiny pair of baby shoes. "I bought these the day she told me she was late getting her cycle," he said. "I didn't say anything to her, didn't want to scare her. I was going to wait. And then she left for Atlanta. I kept them anyway, just in case." The box shook in his hands. "I didn't know you existed," he whispered. But my heart did. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away. 24 years, I said. "That's a long time to wait. I would have waited 100. We sat on the bench outside the clinic in silence. People passed by, couples with strollers, a teenager on a bike, a man with a grocery bag and earbuds in. The world didn't stop. But mine had shifted entirely. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted. "Be someone's daughter, not after all this time." "You don't have to figure it out right away," he said. "We can take it one moment at a time." I looked at him. What does that look like? He smiled gently. Coffee. Questions. Dinners where I tell embarrassing stories about your mom. And maybe one day you'll tell me something that hurts, and I'll be there to listen. I looked down at the photo in the box. Okay, I said quietly. We can start there. We walked to the car in silence, but a lighter one. When we pulled into our driveway, the porch light was already on, even though the sun hadn't fully set. My mom opened the door as we stepped onto the front steps. Her eyes met Daniel's, and something passed between them that didn't need words. He held up the little box. I kept them. She looked inside her lips, trembling. You remembered, she whispered. I never forgot. She stepped aside to let him in. I followed them in and closed the door behind us, the air inside warm with the smell of lemon balm tea steeping in the kitchen. And for the first time in my life, I felt something I never knew I was missing. Whole. The days that followed moved slowly, like the house had shifted into a softer rhythm we weren't used to. Daniel visited every afternoon around 4, always bringing something her favorite shortbread cookies from the bakery downtown. A scarf, he said, reminded him of one she wore when they were younger, a book of poems with her initials scribbled in the margins. Things no one else would have known mattered. But he did. And Mom, she changed. Not dramatically, not in the kind of way that made her illness disappear or her strength return overnight. But there was a new light behind her eyes. She laughed more, sat by the window longer, let herself drift into stories from the past without shutting down halfway through. I saw the difference, felt it like the way warm sunlight feels after weeks of cloud. But underneath the quiet warmth, something else had started to build inside me. Questions. Ones I hadn't asked. Ones I was afraid would tip the balance if I said them out loud. So I held them. Until Friday night, when I found myself walking into Eli's apartment with a container of leftover pasta and too much on my chest. He raised an eyebrow as he opened the door. You brought carbs and a complicated expression. Should I open wine or tea? I let out a breath. Wine. He chuckled and stepped aside. Thought so. His place was warm and smelled like cedarwood and laundry soap. I sank into his worn-out couch, tucking my feet under me as he poured 2 glasses and handed me one. You okay? He asked, sitting down beside me. I swirled the wine and stared into it like it held answers. I'm not sure. That's progress. A week ago you were definitely not okay. I smiled just a little. He's here almost every day now. He brings her things, sits with her, talks like no time has passed. It's beautiful. But I don't know what to do with all of it. With him, with everything. My whole life I've pictured my father as a blur, a shadow, someone who walked away or didn't care, or maybe never even knew I existed. Now he's this man who holds my mom's hand like he never wanted to let go, who looks at me like I matter in a way he's been waiting for. Eli leaned forward, his voice softer now. And that scares you. It confuses me, I said. I want to let it in. But part of me still feels like I don't know how, like there's a wall inside me that doesn't know what to do with being wanted. Eli was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that stopped me. Maybe being wanted isn't something you need to figure out. Maybe it's something you just let happen. I looked at him, his steady eyes the way he always saw, straight through the noise. It doesn't feel fair, I whispered, to be grateful and angry at the same time. It's not fair, he said, but it's real. And it's yours. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling again, the way I used to. Except this time I wasn't waiting for the phone to ring, I was wondering what I'd say if it did. The next morning, Daniel came early. I found him in the kitchen with Mom making her a cup of mint tea like he'd done it 100 times before. She was smiling, watching him like it wasn't the first time they'd done this, but the 100th time they finally got to again. "Morning," I said, stepping in. Daniel turned to me, warmth in his face. "Hey, we were just talking about the music festival next weekend," Mom said. "Remember the one they have in Pack Square every spring?" I nodded. "Yeah. You used to take me, even when I didn't care about the music. You liked the kettle corn," she teased. "I still do." Daniel looked at me. "Would you want to go, the three of us?" The question landed gently, but it made my stomach twist. I looked at my mom. She was waiting, not pushing, just watching me the way only she could, hopeful, cautious. "Yeah," I said, after a beat. "I think that would be good." Later, after Daniel left and Mom had dozed off for her afternoon nap, I walked down to the trail behind the house. It was a narrow path that curved through the trees and opened up near the river. I used to come here as a teenager when everything felt too loud. The water was low and slow, the sound soft enough to hear my own thoughts. I sat on a flat rock and pulled my phone out. My thumb hovered over Daniel's number. Then I tapped it. He picked up on the first ring. "Maya, hey," I said, voice barely above a whisper. "You all right? I wanted to ask you something." "Anything." There was a pause. Then I said it. "If you had known about me, what kind of dad do you think you would have been?" Silence. Then slowly he spoke. "I think I would have been terrified, and overjoyed, and lost, and I would have made mistakes, probably too many. But I would have shown up. I would have been there even when I didn't have the answers." He paused, voice thick. "I would have told you every day that you were wanted." My chest ached in a new way, like something breaking open gently instead of shattering. "I think I would have liked that," I said. "I still can," he said softly. "If you let me." I nodded, though he couldn't see it. "I'm trying. I know." As I ended the call, the sun broke through the clouds, lighting up the river in streaks of gold. And for the first time in a very long time, I let it touch me. The morning of the festival, the air buzzed with that strange blend of spring warmth and nerves that settle in your stomach when something is about to shift. The scent of damp grass floated in through the open windows, mixing with the faint hint of cinnamon from the rolls I'd tried to bake and slightly overcooked. Still edible, but definitely leaning toward extra toasted. My mom sat at the kitchen table in a soft yellow cardigan, her hair brushed and pinned back, her cheeks touched with color for the first time in weeks. She looked tired but brighter. Lighter. "You sure you're up for this?" I asked, pouring her tea. She smiled, lifting her cup. "I've missed more than enough spring days. I want this one." I nodded even as I checked my phone again. 10:14 a.m. No text from Daniel yet. Not that he'd be late. He never was. "Are you nervous?" she asked. A little. About him I hesitated. About all of it. She studied me for a second. "You know, love doesn't always look the way we thought it would, or arrive when we wanted. Sometimes it shows up late with luggage you didn't ask for, and still you open the door." I gave her a look. "Are you quoting a Hallmark movie?" She laughed. "Maybe." At 10:29, there was a soft knock at the front door. I opened it to find Daniel standing there in a light gray jacket and jeans holding a paper bag. He lifted it. "Still owe you kettle corn." I took it with a smile. "You remembered. I never forget things that matter." He stepped inside and paused when he saw my mom. "Rosalind?" He said, his voice gentler now. "You look beautiful." She raised an eyebrow. "You say that every time you see me. That's because it's still true." We made it to the festival by late morning. Pack Square was already filling up families on blankets, street performers juggling in front of laughing kids, tents lined with local crafts and vendors. A bluegrass band played softly near the main stage, their harmonies weaving through the hum of conversation. Mom held my arm as we walked her steps, slow but steady. Daniel stayed close on her other side, not crowding, just present. Protective in a way that didn't speak. I noticed the way his eyes kept flicking to her like he was checking to make sure she was okay, without saying it aloud. We found a bench under one of the big oak trees that edged the square. Daniel laid out a light blanket for her to sit on more out of habit than necessity, like it was something he'd always done. I sat next to her while Daniel went to grab drinks. The sun filtered through the leaves above us, creating dancing shadows across her lap. "He's careful with you," I said, watching him at the coffee stand. She nodded. "He always was." "Did you love him?" Her smile was soft. So much it scared me. "Do you still?" She looked down at her hands, folded neatly. I never stopped. When Daniel returned with iced tea for her and coffee for me, he handed me the cup without a word. But his hand brushed mine, and for a second, I forgot how to breathe. We sat in comfortable silence, watching people pass. But inside me, the questions stirred again. That wall, the one I thought had started to come down, had layers I hadn't seen before. Eventually, I excused myself to wander. I needed space, air, time. I walked the perimeter of the festival, stopping near a tent where an older woman painted tiny flowers on children's cheeks. Her booth was called Time and Petals. I don't know why, but the name stuck. I stood there for a moment, just watching. "Are you all right?" Daniel's voice came behind me. I turned surprised to see him alone. "She's resting," he said. "Your mom found some shade and made a friend who used to teach watercolor." I didn't want to interrupt. I nodded. "Good." We walked for a bit without saying anything, just the sound of our footsteps on the grass and the echo of music in the background. Then finally I asked the question that had lived in my chest for days. "Why didn't you ever try again? To love someone else, I mean." Daniel's brow furrowed. He didn't answer right away. "I did try," he said, finally. "But no one ever fit. They didn't have her laugh. Or the way she always looked you in the eye when she asked a question like your answer really mattered. I never got over her Maya. I just buried it, like a box I was too afraid to open." I looked at him, really looked. "Do you still feel that way?" He stopped walking. The breeze rustled between us. A child squealed somewhere near the kettle corn stand. The world didn't stop, but I did. "Yes," he said. The weight of it hit me harder than I expected. Not because I was surprised, but because of how quiet the truth was. No fanfare, no dramatic declarations. Just a man standing in front of his daughter carrying a love that had lasted a quarter of a century without being watered. I swallowed. "Then what happens now?" "That depends," he said. "On your mother. On you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, an old folded piece of paper. The edges were worn, almost falling apart. "She wrote this," he said, handing it to me. "The day she left Atlanta, I found it behind the dresser weeks after. I never told her. I couldn't. It felt too sacred. I unfolded it carefully. It wasn't long, just 6 lines. Daniel, I don't know what happens next. I don't even know if you'll ever see this. But if love is real, it survives the storm. If I don't make it back in time, please know I never stopped loving you." My throat tightened. "She was going to come back," I whispered. "I know." I looked at him, heart full and heavy. "She deserves the time she lost." "So do you." I nodded, blinking fast. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's go sit with her." We walked back through the crowd, side by side. And in that moment, I realized some stories aren't about starting over. They're about continuing, finally, after the silence. The house was quiet that evening, but not in the hollow way it used to be. It was the kind of quiet that follows a day full of meaning, where every creak of the floor, every breath of the wind through the window screen carries a memory. Mom was asleep early, curled under the quilt Nana had made when I was born, her face relaxed in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. The festival had taken more out of her than she wanted to admit, but she hadn't said a word about it. Not when Daniel was there. Not when the music played and she clapped along with a strength she borrowed from somewhere deep. I stood at the doorway for a long time, just watching her, her chest rising and falling in a slow rhythm. Then I closed the door gently and padded back down the hall, where the scent of kettle corn still lingered faintly in the air. Daniel was sitting in the living room jacket, off sleeves, rolled the box of old photographs open in front of him. He'd brought it over after dinner, said he thought it was time to look at what was lost and maybe found. I sat down across from him on the floor, pulling one of the smaller envelopes into my lap. "These are from the river cabin," he said, holding up a picture of my mom with her hair wet and wild laughing as she stood knee-deep in the water, a chipped enamel mug in hand. "She looked free," I said quietly. "She was," he replied. "With me, she let herself be. It's what I miss most, that freedom we only ever found in each other." I didn't speak for a while. I just ran my fingers over the edges of the photo, feeling the weight of time. Daniel set the picture aside. "Can I ask you something?" "Maya." I looked up. "Yeah, when did you stop letting people get close to you?" The question didn't sting, but it landed. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe I never started." He nodded like he understood that far too well. Sometimes when something important goes missing early on, we build walls around everything else. Tell ourselves it's to stay strong. But really it's to keep from being found out that we still hurt. His words weren't sharp. They were gentle, like he wasn't just talking about me. "I didn't mean to keep you at arm's length," I said. "I just didn't know how to pull you in. You don't have to know how," he said. "You just have to let it happen." I picked up another photo, a blurry one of a birthday cake candles, half blown out my mom mid-laugh. "I never celebrated my birthday like this," I said, tracing the image. She made it special always. But there were no big parties, no dad with a camera, no one telling me I looked just like him. "You do, by the way," Daniel said softly. "You've got her fire but my eyes. It's like looking in a mirror sometimes. That did something to me I wasn't ready for. A strange ache, equal parts comfort and longing. She used to say my eyes carried more than they should," I whispered. "She's right." The silence that followed was full of unspoken things. Finally I asked, "Do you regret it?" He looked at me for a long time before answering. "I regret not fighting harder, not chasing her, not being brave enough to ask what I really wanted." His voice cracked slightly. "But I don't regret loving her. I don't regret wanting you, even if I never knew you were mine until now." I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. "You can still be here," I said, "if you want to." He didn't move. Didn't rush in with a hug or a thank you or a dramatic promise. He just whispered, "I do." That night after he left, I stood in the kitchen washing the few cups we'd used, letting the water run a little longer than needed. The moon hung high, pale, and steady outside the window. I thought about how the story we were writing didn't look like the ones I grew up reading. It didn't have a perfect beginning. It wouldn't have a neat middle. But maybe it could still be beautiful. Maybe the most beautiful stories are the ones that keep going, even after they break. I dried my hands, turned off the light, and stepped down the hall toward my mother's room. Just before I reached her door, she called out softly, "Maya, I eased it open. Yeah, Mom. She turned her head slightly on the pillow. Was he still here? I nodded. He just left. She closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. He loved me in the kind of way that stays in your bones. I walked to her side, sat down on the edge of the bed. He still does. She reached for my hand, her fingers cool and familiar. And you I swallowed. I'm learning to let him. She squeezed once. That's enough. I stayed there until her breathing slowed again. Then I pulled the quilt up to her shoulders and kissed her forehead. In the hallway, the shadows stretched long and quiet, the kind that whispered, "This is what healing looks like, not loud, not fast, but real." And in the center of it all, us, beginning again, together. The turning point came on a Tuesday morning. I remember because the sun was shining in that stubborn early spring kind of way, too bright for the still chilly air, like the sky was trying to convince the earth it was warmer than it really felt. Daniel had just left his suit jacket draped over his arm, the smell of his cologne still hanging faintly in the air. He'd stayed longer than usual sipping coffee with Mom and helping her rearrange the living room bookshelf one title at a time. I think it made her feel normal, like this quiet return of routine was something they could build on. I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing a cup, when the doorbell rang. Unexpected. I dried my hands, walked to the door, and opened it. A woman stood there. Late 50s, maybe. Stylish, with a tailored trench coat and sunglasses that didn't quite hide the tight line of her mouth. Her nails were perfect, short, clean, painted pale pink. She looked like someone who belonged in an upscale gallery, not on our quiet little porch. "Hi," I said cautiously. "Can I help you? I'm looking for Daniel Whitaker," she said, voice clipped like each word was being weighed. My heart stuttered. "He's not here." She nodded once. I assumed. I was told he's been spending time here, with Rosalind and her daughter. There was something in the way she said daughter that made my skin prickle. "I'm Maya," I said, straightening. "And you are a beat past." "I'm Evelyn," she said. "Daniel's business partner." And we were together. For a long time. The silence stretched between us. "I see," I said, even though I didn't. She studied me, then let out a breath like she hadn't meant to make this awkward, but it was already too late. "Look, I didn't come to make a scene," she added. "But I thought someone should be honest with you. With all of you." I waited, heart now thudding in my chest. "Daniel and I built everything together," she said. "The company. The life. We were supposed to grow old side by side. And now he's just disappeared into this town, into some fantasy from decades ago." Her voice wasn't cruel, but it was sharp. I swallowed hard. He didn't know about me. Not until a few weeks ago. "I know that," she said quickly. "This isn't about blame. It's about consequences, consequences. He's not just some man rediscovering himself. He's a man with an empire, contracts, investors, partnerships. People are asking questions, Maya. His absence doesn't go unnoticed." I felt like the air had shifted, gone colder somehow. "And what do you want me to do with that information?" I asked. "I don't want anything from you," she said. "I just thought, before this goes any further, you should understand what it might cost him. And you." I stared at her, unsure if I was angry or just stunned. She stepped back then, as if realizing she'd said more than she intended. "I'll go." I closed the door slowly behind her, my hands suddenly clammy. Upstairs, I found Mom sitting in bed reading. She looked up and saw my face. "What happened?" she asked, setting the book down. "A woman came by," I said, voice tight. "Someone from Daniel's life." Evelyn. My mother's face shifted slightly, like the name was familiar. She said, "Daniel's disappearing act is causing trouble, that people are watching, and that this might cost him everything he's built." Mom exhaled slowly. I always knew the past couldn't stay untouched. What if this isn't sustainable? I asked, pacing. What if his life in Asheville isn't something he can really keep? What if we're just a detour? Maya, she said gently. Come sit. I did. She took my hand. Love isn't about safety. It's about choice. Over and over again. If Daniel's here, it's because he chose to be. Not because he forgot who he was, but because he remembered something more important. I looked down, voice quiet. But what if remembering costs him everything? Then he'll decide if it's worth it. That night, I stood by my bedroom window watching the stars try to break through the haze. The story was shifting. The lines between past and present were beginning to blur. And deep down, I knew the next chapter wouldn't come quietly. Daniel showed up the next morning before I could even finish my first cup of coffee. His car pulled into the driveway quietly, like it was trying not to wake the street. I saw him through the window, his face drawn, his shoulders tense beneath a dark sweater I hadn't seen him wear before. When I opened the door, he didn't speak. Not right away. I saw her, I said before he could. He nodded once like he expected that. Evelyn's direct. That's one word for it. He stepped inside, carefully, like he didn't know if the house still welcomed him. I folded my arms. She said this might ruin you, that your absence is being noticed, that people are asking questions. Daniel ran a hand through his hair and exhaled. They are. The board called an emergency meeting. I postponed it for a few days, but I can't put it off forever. I leaned against the kitchen counter, feeling the space between us stretch and twist. So what does that mean? You go back, fix the mess, and disappear again. His eyes snapped to mine. Is that what you think I'd do? I don't know what to think, Daniel. This isn't some summer romance. This is your life, your legacy. And we're just this house with peeling paint and quiet nights, and a mother who's hanging on by hope and love and not much else. His face changed, then not hurt, but something deeper. A quiet devastation. I didn't come here to run away, he said. I came because I needed to know the truth. About Rosalind, about you, and now I know it. And I can't unknow it. But what happens when they demand you choose? I asked, voice shaking. What happens when your name starts slipping off the office doors and onto headlines about scandal and lost deals and boardroom drama? He took a step forward. Then I'll choose. I stared at him. You'll choose us? I already did. There was something in the way he said it. Simple. Certain. I've built enough things in my life that looked perfect from the outside, he continued. But none of them ever gave me peace. This? He gestured gently. This house, this table, that teacup on the windowsill that's missing a chip, it's the first thing that's ever felt like home. Tears welled up before I could stop them. He stepped closer, then reached into his pocket and held out a small folded paper. My chest tightened. She gave this to me last night, he said. Rosalind said I should read it to you. I opened it with careful fingers. Her handwriting was shaky, but still hers. Maya, if you're reading this, it means you're standing at a crossroad, one that I've stood at myself. Sometimes love doesn't show up when it's easy. Sometimes it shows up when it's hard, when choosing it costs something. But real love, the kind that stays, is always worth the cost. Don't protect yourself so much that you forget how to be held. And don't let fear write the ending to a story that's just beginning. My throat closed. I folded the paper slowly, pressing it against my heart. She knew, I whispered. She always did, Daniel said. I looked at him, really looked. past the tailored clothes and the old regret and the worry etched into the corners of his mouth. And what I saw was a man standing on the edge of everything he'd ever built, willing to walk away from it if it meant finally being whole. And that broke something open in me. I'm scared, I admitted. He stepped forward, gently cupping the side of my face. Me too. But I don't want to lose you, I said, voice cracking. You won't, he promised. Not this time. The quiet in the room shifted. It wasn't empty anymore. It was full of truth, of fear, of hope, layered thick like fog that might lift with morning. We stood there for a long time. No labels, no resolutions. Just two people who had spent too long in the shadows, finally letting the light in. And for once, I wasn't bracing for the fall. I was standing in the middle of something fragile and real, letting it hold me. The days that followed moved slower, like the world around us had agreed to quiet down just long enough for us to breathe. It felt fragile, like glass resting on the edge of a counter, something beautiful you didn't want to touch too fast. Daniel didn't rush to leave. He made calls from the back porch, took meetings on his laptop, while birds sang in the trees behind the house. Every now and then, I'd see him pause mid-conversation, glance toward the kitchen window, like he was remembering where he was and choosing to stay anyway. Mom noticed it too. One evening, as we sat on the couch folding laundry, her blankets mostly, she said, "You know what? I see in him now." I looked up. What peace, like he's finally not fighting himself. That landed heavier than she meant it to, because I saw it too. But I also saw the pressure building behind his quiet eyes, the weight of everything waiting for him back in Atlanta. And then, one afternoon, it came. He was out front trimming the small hedge that hadn't been properly cut in years when his phone rang. I saw his face change as he answered it. Not panic, but resignation. A flicker of something final. I stepped out, wiping my hands on a towel. "Who was it?" He didn't answer right away. Just turned off the trimmer, set it down carefully, and took a breath. "The board," he said. "They've called a vote. They're deciding whether or not to remove me." The words sat between us like ice. "They say I've abandoned my role, that my judgment's been compromised." I tried to steady my voice. "Is that true?" He looked at me, no apology in his eyes. "If choosing you and your mom over endless contracts makes me compromised, then yes." I swallowed hard. "So, what will you do?" He reached for my hand, his voice lower. "I'll go. I have to. For a few days. Just to be in the room. To say what needs to be said." And then he hesitated. "That depends on them." "No," I said quietly. "That depends on you." He studied me like he wanted to memorize my face. "I don't want to go backwards, Maya. I don't want to lose this. You won't. But you do have to face it. Whatever they decide, you have to be the one who decides what kind of man you'll be after." A long pause passed. Then he nodded. "I leave tomorrow." That night I found Mom by the window, her fingers wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. "He told you?" she asked. I nodded. She stared out into the darkness, the porch light catching the silver in her hair. I always knew the world he came from would try to pull him back. "Do you think he'll come back on his own?" She looked at me, then, eyes tired but clear. "I think this time he knows where home is." The next morning was quiet. Daniel packed his things, slowly folding each shirt like he was marking time. I waited by the front steps, arms wrapped around myself as the car idled behind him. When he finally turned, suitcase in hand, I walked toward him. "I don't want you to leave afraid," I said. "I'm not afraid of leaving," he replied. "I'm afraid of returning and everything changing." I stepped closer. "Things are changing, but not the way you think. Not away from you, with you." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. I found this in one of the boxes last week. It was hers, your mom's, from when she was pregnant with you. My hands shook slightly as I opened it. Inside were short entries, just dates and thoughts, messy handwriting and scribbled hopes. June 4th felt her kick, like she's already trying to make herself known. July 19th. I don't know how I'll do this alone, but I'll do it with love. I closed the book, tears stinging. Thank you for bringing this. She wanted you to have it, he said, even if she couldn't give it to you herself. We stood there, the engine humming in the background. Come back, I said, voice cracking. No matter what happens, come back. He nodded slowly. I will. He kissed my forehead softly, and then he was gone. The house felt too still after he left, the air different, the walls waiting. I walked to Mom's room holding the notebook against my chest. She loved him, I said softly, sitting beside her. She still does, Mom whispered. We both do. And for the first time in a long time, I realized that love wasn't just about showing up. It was about staying, especially when the rest of the world is asking you to leave. 3 days passed. 3 long, quiet days filled with overwatered plants, half-folded laundry, and me checking my phone more than I cared to admit. Daniel hadn't called. Not once. I kept telling myself it made sense he was in meetings dealing with pressure, navigating a world I'd never been part of. But logic didn't soothe the ache in my chest. It didn't stop the clock on the wall from ticking a little too loud, like it knew I was waiting. Mom tried to fill the space. She asked about things we hadn't talked about in years. Childhood memories, stories I'd buried in the corners of my heart. But every time her eyes flicked to mine, I knew she saw what I couldn't say. You're not good at pretending not to care, she said one evening softly. I sighed. I'm trying not to fall apart over something that might not be mine to hold on to. She gave me a look, gentle but firm. You didn't imagine him, Maya. What you shared wasn't fiction, but maybe it was temporary. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Some people live their whole lives never being brave enough to choose love over pride. You were brave. He was too. And if he walks away now, it won't be because of you. It'll be because he's still afraid. That night, I couldn't sleep. I got up around midnight and found myself walking into the living room, drawn like gravity to the couch, where he used to sit in the mornings, coffee in hand, eyes soft with something new. I curled up in that same spot, clutching Mom's journal, flipping pages, just to feel closer to something real. And that's when I heard it. The front door creaked open. For a split second, I thought I was dreaming. But then the door clicked shut again, and slow footsteps moved across the floor. I sat up fast, my heart in my throat. Daniel stood in the hallway, suitcase in hand, looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen him, but he was here. I couldn't move at first, couldn't speak. He dropped the suitcase gently and ran a hand through his hair. I wasn't sure you'd still want me to walk through that door. I blinked hard. You were gone 3 days, Daniel. Without a word. I know, he said. And I'm sorry. I had to make peace with something before I came back. I finally stood, arms crossed tight against the fear still coiled in my stomach. What happened? He stepped closer. They voted. The board, and I lost. The words hung heavy in the room. You lost your company, I whispered. He nodded. They gave me an option to step down gracefully or be removed publicly. I chose grace. Tears welled up before I could stop them. You gave it up? He looked at me, eyes full of quiet fire. It was never the company that mattered, Maya. It was the life I thought it gave me. But standing in that room, surrounded by people who never really knew me, I realized something. What that all my success, all the numbers and headlines, it meant nothing without anyone to come home to. I swallowed hard, my voice cracking. And now he stepped closer slowly, like he wasn't sure I'd let him get too near. Now I want to build something new. Not an empire. Just a life, one that includes Sunday coffee crooked hedges and a daughter who makes me feel like I still have time to do one thing right. The dam broke. I closed the distance between us and wrapped my arms around him, holding him tight, as if I could somehow protect him from everything he'd just lost. But he didn't feel broken. He felt whole. He buried his face in my shoulder. I didn't come back because I had nowhere else to go. I came back because you were the only place that felt like home. I pulled back enough to look him in the eye. And Mom. His lips curled into something soft. If she'll have me, I want to be there for whatever time she has left. Not as some man from her past, as the one who finally stayed. I nodded through tears. She'll want that. We both do. The house settled around us, the silence shifting into something warmer. Forgiving. And for the first time in years, I wasn't waiting anymore. He was here. He'd come home. Spring melted slowly into summer, and with it the edges of our lives softened too. The air turned sweeter, the breeze through the screen door, a constant lullaby in the late afternoons. Nothing dramatic happened, no grand declarations, no explosions of emotion. Just the quiet, steady unfolding of something real. Daniel didn't leave again. He moved into the guest room, at first not wanting to overstep, but that didn't last long. The house was small, and hearts that had been locked up too long have a way of reaching for warmth. Slowly, gently, we learned how to be in the same rhythm. Mom had more good days than bad. She took to sitting on the porch with Daniel most mornings, sipping her tea, while he read the local paper aloud to her, voices rising and falling like some old married couple who'd found their way back to the beginning. Sometimes I'd watch them through the screen door, her hand resting on his knee, his head tilted toward her, a softness in his expression I didn't know men like him were allowed to have. There was no bitterness in her anymore, no resentment, just this deep, tired peace that came from being seen even if it was at the end of the road. I started writing again. Not articles or essays, but stories. Pieces of our life moments stitched together like patchwork. I'd sit by the window in the late evenings, laptop open, and try to put into words what it meant to finally be known. One morning I found a letter folded neatly on the kitchen counter. Mom's handwriting. Shaky, but unmistakably hers. Maya, if you're reading this, it means I'm resting now. Don't cry. Or if you must, don't let it be for long. You were my reason for everything. Daniel was my greatest, almost, but also my reminder that some love, even when it doesn't last the way we planned, is still worth it. And you are my forever. Be brave, be soft. Don't let the world make you choose between the two. Let yourself be loved wholly and wildly. You deserve it. Love you always, Mom. I pressed it to my chest and sat down on the floor. The grief came slow like waves. Not crashing, but rolling over me again and again. It didn't drown me. It just asked me to remember. Her passing was quiet. In her sleep in her own bed with Daniel and I by her side. She didn't fight. She just let go like she'd made peace with all the chapters of her life and was finally ready to turn the last page. The house was quieter after that. But it wasn't empty. Daniel stayed. Not because he had nowhere else to go, because he finally understood that love doesn't always come in the way you expect it. Sometimes it arrives 30 years late with gray at the temples and old regrets. But if you're lucky, it still shows up. We rebuilt our lives slowly. He started teaching business part-time at the local community college. I helped the bookstore downtown modernize their catalog system and started hosting weekend writing workshops. One afternoon, while we were walking through the farmer's market, A little girl selling handmade bracelets tugged on Daniel's sleeve and asked if he wanted to buy one for his wife. He turned to me, brow raised. I laughed, but then I didn't say no. We got married under the tree in the backyard. Simple. Just a few friends and the wind threading through the branches. No white gown, no flower arrangements, just my mother's quilt draped over the picnic table and a feeling like the earth had finally exhaled. After the ceremony, Daniel reached for my hand. "You still think this is just a detour?" he whispered. I shook my head, tears pricking. No. This was the destination all along. And it was. Because sometimes the most beautiful love stories aren't the ones that start with fireworks, but the ones that begin again right when you thought all the pages had already been written. That's what we became. Not a fairy tale, but a home. And that was more than enough.